This is Sebastian Crit with a quick review of the Oscar-nominated film, The Irishman. The Irishman, for those of you who don't know, is actually a Netflix-produced film. So even though it was shown in theaters so that it would be up for awards season, you can stream it online through your Netflix subscription. I personally saw it on television, and it was kind of weird seeing a Oscar-nominated film on your television set. But that's probably where the future is going, so nothing too unusual, I would imagine. The Irishman was directed by Martin Scorcese, so it's obviously a well-made film by a classic director, and The Irishman includes all of his classic motifs, from the slow-motion driving scenes to the quick cuts back and forth between different timescapes, classic dark, shadowy lighting that Martin Scorsese is known for, and a lot of the good classic music that helps fill in a lot of his montages that he uses. The Irishman tells the well-known story of Jimmy Hoffa and what happened to him and where did he go. But before it goes into that, it tells the long, convoluted tale of the person who was responsible for killing him, the Irishman, played by Robert DeNiro. I didn't have a problem with Robert De Niro's aging in this film. At the beginning of the film, he's portrayed as a young 30-year-old Robert De Niro, and he ages by the end of the film into the older Robert De Niro. A lot of people had trouble seeing him as a younger Robert De Niro, but I think they did a pretty good job of aging Joe Pesci and Robert De Niro from the younger versions of themselves to the older versions of themselves. I had a problem with Al Pacino's portrayal of Jimmy Hoffa. I had a hard time separating his portrayal of Jimmy Hoffa from Michael Corleone in Godfather Part 3. Personally, I just think it was Al Pacino trying to play Jimmy Hoffa, but unfortunately he was drawing too much on his Godfather scenes and also his 1990s Dick Tracy, where he played a mobster in that, very cartoony-like. I don't research anything on these films before I go in, so I really didn't know anything about what the plot was like before I started watching The Irishman, just so that I can tell people exactly what the story development is like. So although the story develops pretty smoothly from beginning to end, you really don't get a good idea for what is about to happen until Jimmy Hoffa is introduced later on in the film. Probably the biggest problem with The Irishman was just how darn long the film was. It clocks in at 3.5 hours long. It used to be that films were kept to a standard 2-hour length. If they wanted to develop the story a little further, they would push the film to a 3-hour length, but that was tops. Now we're seeing 3 hours 10 minutes, 3 hours 15 minutes. The Irishman clocked in at 3.5 hours long, and that's pretty long to be sitting there watching the film. And even though there were a lot of exciting scenes in the movie, just the sheer length of the film overall degraded the film to the point of it being just a little bit boring and hard to stay awake towards the end. The weird thing about The Irishman, due to its length, it seemed to be separated into 3 different parts. The beginning of the film, where we were introduced to the Irishman himself and what his story is like there. Then at the end of the film, we're introduced to Jimmy Hoffa and then what eventually happens to him. The middle of the film is sort of like a transition between who the Irishman became to his eventual meeting up with Jimmy Hoffa, or being introduced to Jimmy Hoffa in the first place. And that middle half of the film, I don't even think really needed to be there, and that's probably what added most of the length to the film, because it was very awkward, didn't seem to really make any sense. The beginning of the film made a lot of sense, the end of the film made a lot of sense, but the middle of the film, when we're going from fully evolved Irishman to his initial meeting with Jimmy Hoffa, didn't really seem to fit. The end of the film also, after the story ends, the end of the film continues on for a few more years, and that also just kind of drags on until we finally get to the end of the movie. So I don't know what's going on with these length of films, why directors seem to want all of this time to fully develop their films. Keeping your films to a shorter, more standard length really helps to draw out more of the creativity, rather than allowing the story to just ramble on into infinity. After all of that, however, I would consider The Irishman to be the better Jimmy Hoffa films out of all the other Jimmy Hoffa films that have been made throughout history. It is what it is. I'm going to go ahead and give The Irishman 3 out of 5 stars, just because it was so darn long, kind of made it a lot more boring than it needed to be, and there's just a lot more to the story that didn't really need to be there. As always, I'm curious to know what you thought of the film. Please leave your remarks in the comments below. For further analysis of the film, take a look at my Instagram and Twitter accounts linked below. See you next time!